Okay, so the media that you consume plays a massive role in shaping your reality. You are personally exposed to a very tiny part of the world. But in spite of this, we still seem to form representations in our heads of what is happening throughout our entire country, even though we've never actually come into direct contact with it. It exists as this sort of scattered collection of images and ideas in our heads. The only exposure we get to this reality is secondhand, through images, pictures, videos, and stories, and is filtered through the media that we consume. This representation of reality we build through media consumption is often referred to as mediated reality. And theorists on this topic point out that because media acts as a filter through which people come to perceive the world beyond their immediate experience, media therefore holds a tremendous amount of power in shaping people's perception of the world. This mediated reality is very easy to construct and manipulate, and it affects you even if you think it doesn't. In fact, the people who believe this is not happening to them are the people who are actually experiencing it the most. This video is going to explain the process. There are 3 filters of media. The first is what they choose to report on or leave out in the first place. The second is how much emphasis they place on the things they do report on, and third is how they actually do the reporting. So these 3 filters are called gatekeeping, emphasis, and framing, respectively. In many models of this, gatekeeping and emphasis are combined into what is called agenda setting and treated as one filter, but I like describing it as 3 filters because they are distinct and worthy of separate descriptions. Also, things are just better that come in 3s. Trilogies, Pokemon evolutions, World Wars. Filter 1, gatekeeping. So time is finite, right? And so is our attention. So we cannot pay attention to everything that is happening. We end up paying attention to like a few things. And gatekeeping is the media's way of selecting those things. Stuff can only enter your awareness if you hear about it. And in regard to politics, you're only going to hear about things through the media. And media has a bias and a mission. They're trying to make money from their advertisers or selling their own homeopathic boner pills and krill oil if you're Alex Jones, and something called Survival Shield for their info warriors. What is this? I don't know what this is. Anyway, companies need to make money, and they get this through viewership so they can sell you stuff. And the best way to keep people engaged is to just tell your audience what they want to hear, make them afraid of something, keep them entertained, and give them bad guys to be angry at. Human psychology in this area is very simple, and we are all the exact same. Every media company follows this blueprint. But I digress, back to gatekeeping. Gatekeeping is what stories make it onto the screen in the first place, and just as importantly, which do not. The media doesn't always have to outright lie. They can just selectively show you some true stories and leave out other true stories to not give you the full picture. This is basically just lying by omission. If the media doesn't report on something, you will never be aware that it's even happening at all. And if the media wants to push a narrative, all they have to do is just show you all the stories that fit that narrative and ignore all the ones that don't, and they've already begun to construct a skewed version of reality. Filter 2, emphasis. Emphasis deals with the issue of once the stories make it past gatekeeping and are reported on, how much emphasis is given to which stories, like which ones are the headliners, and they go on and on about them for hours, day after day, for months, and which stories are in and out in 2 minutes and just get a brief mention in passing. This causes you to believe certain stories are important and others are not. Like 2 news organizations could both report on the same 2 stories, and one could say something like this: "Well, looks like a puppy is loose in our newsroom today, cute little fella." Now for the headliner. A deadly mass shooting happened in which 100 people were slaughtered mercilessly in a Whole Foods of all places. Is there no place crime cannot creep into? We have helicopters on the scene as the entire attention of the nation rests on this Whole Foods tonight. Here's Mark with the story. So alternatively, they could do a story like this. Well, in news today, a shooting happened in which 5 people were killed at some grocery store, and oh my god, is that a puppy in the newsroom? He is so cute. Oh my god, who's a good boy? Who's a good boy? We need every camera on this puppy. So that's the same 2 stories, pretty different emphasis. Filter 3, framing. Framing is how our stories themselves covered, which aspects are reported on, what conclusions are drawn, what kind of language is being used. If there's an angry congregation of people gathering somewhere and some portion of them are breaking windows and destroying stuff, what are you going to call this group of people? Are you going to call them mostly peaceful protesters, or are you going to call them an angry, violent mob? Are you going to focus on the peaceful ones while technically acknowledging some are violent but they don't represent the whole group? Or are you going to focus on the violent ones and then just say the non-violent people are enabling or supporting the violence? How you word things, which aspects of the story you focus on, massively shapes people's perception of the story. So to recap, it's which stories get picked up in the first place, which stories are emphasized, and how they are framed. Now that we have talked about the filters of media, let's talk about a statistical term called representative sampling. When you're trying to collect data on a population of an entire country, you can't poll every single person in the country. You have to select a small sample of that population, measure that sample, and then extrapolate that data to the rest of the population. But to make sure this works, you have to make sure the sample you're polling is actually representative of the entire population and you're not getting a skewed sample. So for example, if you do a poll at some rich college campus where the people look like this, that is not going to represent the views of all Americans. You're only getting a representative sample of that demographic. Why? Because colleges skew very young, 18 to 25, pretty liberal, pretty wealthy. Likewise, if you go to some town in the Midwest full of boomers and poll people that look like this, that's also not going to be representative of the entire country. So when you do polls and you want them to be accurate, ideally, if you're a good statistician, you find ways to do things like stratified random sampling and a bunch of other technical stuff to try to get samples that are representative of the population. So I'll show you a visual representation of skewed sampling. I created a little world here full of 48 people, and there's 6 of each category. They're black, blue, yellow, orange, green, red, purple, and pink, and I am their god. So say these people are spread out across the geography of their country, and you live in a very small area and you only poll these people. Well, the sample you get from that is going to look something like this. About 3 green, 2 black, 1 blue, and 1 red. That is clearly not a representative sample of the entire population, but if that's all you're seeing, your brain's going to assume it is, so then in that mediated reality in your head, you're going to assume that the whole population looks something like this, because that is the extrapolation of your sample. When of course in actuality the population does not look like that, it looks like this. And a truly representative sample of this population would look like this. 1 person from each group that evenly represents the entire population. So now let's see some media framing in action. Say, within this population of people, there's some beef between the red and the blue people. And in fact, they're even shooting each other. And I'm about to show some pretty graphic acts of violence here, so viewer discretion is advised. Here's a blue person shooting a red person, and a red person shooting a blue person. Why are they shooting each other? I don't know. Socioeconomic factors, maybe they're just racist. I have no idea. The point is, they're shooting each other, there's some beef, and pretty soon they start an entire race war. There's just red people shooting blue people and blue people shooting red people everywhere. Just Mortys killing Mortys. Now, throughout this picture, and you can trust me on this because I made it, there's an equal number of blue people killing red people and red people killing blue people. In this hypothetical world, they are exactly at parity. The hate crimes are 50-50 even each way. So if you are red media and your audience is red people, you might report something like this. So you would leave out all of the examples of red people shooting blue people, and you would only report on the stories of blue people shooting red people. So if you're a red person that only lives around red people, you never really see any blue people, and all you see through the media is blue people shooting you every single day, you're probably going to develop a certain picture of reality in your head. Meanwhile, say blue media is doing the same thing, and they're only reporting on the stories where red people are shooting blue people, and none where blue are shooting red. So they're constructing their own version of reality in which the red people are the terrorists, they hate them, they want to genocide them, right? So this is gatekeeping. Just from leaving out certain stories and talking about others, they're already painting a certain skewed version of reality that is not representative of the totality of what's happening. Now, people are stupid, but they're not that stupid, and if you only show them one side doing something wrong forever, they're going to get a little bit suspicious of you. So if you're red media and you're smart, instead of reporting like this, your report might look something like this, where you still predominantly show blue people shooting red people, but you throw in 2 little stories in there of a red person shooting a blue person. Because now you get to say, hey, we're not afraid to criticize our own side. We show both sides of the issue. We're fair. We're not afraid to talk about it, And technically, yeah, they're showing these 2 stories, but still the relative emphasis that they're giving to the stories is still not representative of reality. Every company will do this. To some extent, they'll criticize their own people just to be able to say, oh, well, see, here's that time that we weren't afraid to criticize our own guys. And, we totally, we're fair and nonpartisan. So through gatekeeping, yeah, perhaps a few stories come through, but then through emphasis, they're still painting a partisan, one-sided picture of reality. Additionally, when framing comes in all the examples of blue people shooting red people, they're going to report on that like there's this mass epidemic and blue people are terrorists and they want to genocide their red people and they hate them and they're out to destroy them and their culture and stuff. But when it comes time to report on the red people shooting the blue people, those stories are going to come and go in like 5 or 10 minutes, not a lot of emphasis. They're certainly not going to be repeated over and over again. And they're going to be framed in this way where they'll say something like, well, we denounce this and it's horrible, obviously, but at the same time, blue people do this to us way more. And I mean, what can you expect? Like, something's gonna happen eventually if you like make us this upset. Now, of course, we're not condoning it. We're obviously saying it's horrible, but you know. So they're gonna be way more charitable with it in terms of their emphasis and their framing. So you can see how through these filters, we can construct any version of reality we want to sell people. And we don't even have to outright lie to do this. We can just kind of move the spotlight around very selectively and just focus and word things in certain ways. And after consuming years and years of this content, very different bubbles of mediated reality begin to emerge. So now I'll list a couple of real-world examples of people's perception of reality being skewed by what they're consuming.
You're talking about hormone blockers.
Yeah.
Millions of kids have been on hormone blockers, really?
I'm sure someone's going to fact check me on that, but my guess is that we're into the millions now at this point. Yeah, that would be my guess.
It says over the last 5 years, there were at least 4,780 adolescents who started puberty blockers and had a prior gender dysphoria diagnosis.
It says it's kind of undercounted, but
that would be a big undercounting.
Less than 1,000 people a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess, hundreds of thousands at this, but I could be wrong.
Million sounds great.
Yeah.
So this is how disconnected from reality Matt Walsh is if he thinks that millions of kids are taking hormone blockers whenever the actual figure is something around 1,000 a year in a country where the population is 300 million. I mean, he's orders of magnitude off from the truth. And so, but if that's what Matt Walsh believes, because that's all he's paying attention to, and then that's all he's filtering through and selling his audience, well, then that's what his audience is going to believe, because he's saying it, they're not fact-checking him, and he is just relentlessly focusing on this issue, giving them false information. That is the bubble of reality Matt Walsh lives in. The number of kids in America that are going through this is infinitesimal, but in Matt Walsh's mind, and by extension the mind of his audience, it's this huge epidemic of just, it's happening everywhere. Millions of kids because of framing and emphasis. And gatekeeping, and the fact that Matt Walsh or Jordan Peterson, for that matter, never have on trans people who are happy with their transition, or they never tell you the fact that there's about a 1% regret rate for people that transition. If you just watch Matt Walsh and Jordan Peterson, you're going to walk away thinking that like 80% of people that transition regret it, whenever the actual figure is about 1%. So just to be fair, I'll do this to the left as well. So when you poll liberals and you ask them, how many unarmed black men do you think are killed by police annually? About half of them believe that it's over 1,000 per year, when the actual figure is between 12 and 27 unarmed black men per year, depending on whose numbers you look at. That's a couple orders of magnitude greater than what the actual numbers are. Now, just as a quick aside, there's mountains of evidence of the systemic racism black people experience in America, in our criminal justice system, hiring, housing, all kinds of stuff, and I have a video in the works about that. My point in bringing this stat up is not to disparage that argument, just to point out that on this one particular statistic, people's perception of it is way overblown, purely because of media framing. On the topic of gatekeeping and also accountability for news organizations, Fox News pushed this narrative for a long time that the 2020 election was stolen, and they were recently sued by Dominion voting machines for this claim because it was false. And the CEO of Fox, Rupert Murdoch, admitted under oath that the 2020 election was not stolen. And not only does he know that now, but he admits that he knew it back then too. So this wasn't some, whoopsie-daisies, an honest mistake, they thought it was stolen, but turns out it wasn't. They knew the entire time that they were lying, and he admits this under oath. He knew it was happening, they chose not to stop them. The hosts themselves knew they were lying as well. They settled for $787 million in this defamation lawsuit, and one of the features of it, though, was that Fox didn't have to report on their airtime that they lost the case. They didn't have to report anything about the case. So if you're somebody who only watches Fox News, you may not even know that this court case ever happened because Fox never had to talk about it. The only way you know about this court case is if you hear it from something outside of Fox. And if you just watch Fox and you're that diehard, you're going to go on with your life never knowing that Fox News was lying to your face for years because they're just going to bury it and move on. And again, to be fair, CNN did this too with the Trump Russiagate stuff, back in 2016. For years, they held on to this narrative, and then whenever it turns out that there was never any evidence for it, they never apologized, they never retracted it, they just buried it and moved on, because that's what media does. The information you receive through media is being passed through a system of filters before it reaches you, and some institution is benefiting from you believing that information. It is affecting your purchasing decisions, it is affecting how you vote, vote, it's affecting how you live. Someone is benefiting from putting that mediated reality into your head. This seems easy for us to apply to people who live in China or North Korea, right? From the outside, we can see those filters and those incentives of state propaganda pretty clearly. If you don't believe me, watch some North Korean films sometime. They are scary in how they tie everything back into devotion to the state, even their romance and coming of age movies. It's very, very creepy. So we can see this when we look at places like North Korea, but that same thing is happening to us. Now, it's more subtle in the West, for sure. It's harder to spot to the untrained eye, but it's just as real. We are fed propaganda all the time. We're fed constructed narratives all the time. And there are perspectives outside of the standard American left-right paradigm that are never even brought up at all. We're taught that if you watch Fox and CNN, you're getting both sides of the political divide, but these institutions fall in lockstep on so many issues when it comes to corporate taxes, deregulation, anything that benefits corporate America. Why? Because that's where these companies' advertising revenue comes from. And if you think, well, I've escaped that matrix, I watch alternative media like InfoWars or Dave Rubin, those same incentives are still there. People like Dave Rubin are still backed by billionaires and think tanks that exist to push policy agendas. And if you look at the channels of these people, what they talk about, what they don't talk about, what they focus on, what they hit over and over and over again, what they ignore, how they frame things, their bias, their mission is revealed pretty quickly. So my final parting words here are this. When you are consuming media later today or tomorrow or this weekend, ask yourself, what filters did this information have to pass through before it got to me? And most importantly, who is benefiting from my attention right now? The answer to that last question is very rarely going to be you.